I used to think I was immune to this kind of thing. Attraction, temptation affairs. They belonged to other people. People who were careless. Selfish. Not me. Not someone who went home to the same man for 11 years. Not someone who still wore her ring, even when it felt more like habit than commitment. But that morning, he looked at me, and something shifted. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't obvious. It was still. Like the world paused between his glance and my breath catching in my chest. And for the first time in so long, I didn't feel invisible. We were in the middle of a Monday meeting. Same boardroom. Same coffee. Same dull slide deck on projected numbers. But none of that registered. Not when he turned just slightly, like he knew I was watching him, and held my gaze just a moment too long. It was nothing. It was everything. I told myself I imagined it. That I was just tired, bored, lonely. But I couldn't unfeel it. That glance lit something inside me. Something I thought had gone out years ago. And the strangest part? He didn't smile. He didn't say a word. Just that look. Unapologetic. Curious. Quietly electric. I looked away first. Pretended to check my phone. Laughed at something someone else said, though I didn't hear it. My skin felt flushed. My legs crossed themselves tighter beneath the table. And all day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. I barely knew anything about his personal life. He worked in operations. Always on time. Always polite. Never tried too hard. Never lingered. Until now. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband, his back to me, breathing soft and even, while I stared at the ceiling, and saw his eyes. And that's when I realized, this wasn't going to go away. The next day I wore lipstick. Not much. Just a soft rose shade I hadn't touched in months. I told myself it was for me. Just a little confidence boost. But somewhere deep down, I wondered if he'd notice. And he did. I caught him glancing once, maybe twice. Subtle. Quick. But it was there. That flicker of attention that made my pulse skip like a scratched record. We didn't speak. Just passed each other in the hallway. His shoulder brushed mine. Could have been accidental. It wasn't. There was something about the silence between us. Charged. Like a conversation we hadn't had yet, but both felt echoing in our bones. I started noticing everything. The way he leaned back in his chair during calls, thumb resting on his lip. The quiet patience in his voice when people interrupted him. The way he listened, really listened, like the world slowed down just for that. And I started comparing, which I hated. But I couldn't help it. My husband and I barely talked about anything real anymore. Bills. Groceries. Scheduling. Even our touches had grown mechanical. A hand on my waist here, a quick kiss on the cheek there. But this man, this coworker, he made me feel again. Not just seen. Wanted. One afternoon, I dropped a file beside his desk. He picked it up, fingers grazing mine. "Thanks," I said, trying to sound normal. But my voice caught. He looked at me like he heard it. That little break in my words. That tremble I didn't mean to let out. And in that second, everything between us was real. No fantasy. No misunderstanding. Just, yes, you feel it too. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. But every step felt heavier. Like I'd left part of myself right there. Between his fingers and my breath. That night I opened my journal for the first time in years. And wrote a name that wasn't my husband's. We stayed in that strange limbo for weeks. Polite. Professional. Careful. But there was an edge to it. A tension that hummed beneath every good morning. Every accidental glance. Every time our hands got just a little too close when passing something between us. It was quiet torture. The kind that made me ache when I got home at night. And tried to fall asleep beside a man who didn't notice I'd stopped talking during dinner. One Friday I stayed late to finish some reports. He was there too. Working, or maybe just avoiding going home, same as me. The office was quiet. Too quiet. When I got up to refill my water, he looked up. "You're here late," he said. I shrugged. "Deadlines." He nodded but didn't look away. And neither did I. That silence between us. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was thick. Heavy with all the things we hadn't dared say. I leaned against the counter. He stood up, walked over slower than he needed to. Stopped just a little too close. We talked, but not really. Small things. Weekend plans. Music. But his eyes never left mine. And mine couldn't look away. It wasn't what we said. It was how we said it. Like every word was just a reason to stay near each other. And then, his hand brushed mine. A light, careful touch. Just a moment. But my skin remembered it long after. I should have stepped back. But I didn't. Instead I asked, "What time is it?" He looked down at his watch, but didn't answer. "I should probably head out," I said softly. He nodded, but neither of us moved. Something was happening. Unspoken. Undeniable. And when I finally turned to go, he followed. Just steps behind me, not saying a word. The elevator ride down was silent, but I felt every inch of him behind me. The space between us charged, like if I breathed too deeply it would all unravel. We reached the lobby. Doors opened. Cool air hit my skin like a splash of reality. And still he didn't leave. He stood beside me at the door, looking out, waiting. I could have said goodnight. I could have walked away. But instead, I asked, "Do you want to walk with me?" We didn't say where we were going. We just walked. Downtown was quiet. The kind of quiet that lets your thoughts get loud. Streetlights spilled soft gold across the pavement. Our footsteps echoed, falling into rhythm without trying. First we talked. But soon, we didn't need to. It was the kind of silence that says everything. The kind you only share with someone who sees you. Really sees you. I felt him beside me, close enough to touch. His shoulder brushing mine every few steps. Not on purpose but not accidental either. Every time it happened something sparked. A soft ripple under my skin. My breath tightening like my body had memorized his without permission. We stopped outside a little cafe, closed now. I leaned against the brick wall. He stood in front of me, hands in his pockets, eyes searching mine. "I don't usually do this," I whispered. He tilted his head, curious. "Do what? Feel this? Want this? Lose myself in something I know I shouldn't touch." But I didn't say that. I just smiled, small, shaky. "I know," he said quietly. His voice was low, steady, like he'd been waiting for this moment too, trying not to hope for it. "I see you," he added. And the way he said it, it wasn't flirtation. It wasn't manipulation. It was truth. Simple. Staggering. No one had said that to me in years. Not in a way that mattered. Not like this. I looked away, afraid he'd see too much in my face. But he didn't move. Didn't try to touch me. Just stood there, still patient, waiting. My chest rose with a breath I couldn't seem to let out. The world felt too quiet. Too still. And when I finally looked back at him, he was closer. Not touching. Just there, in that almost space. Where one wrong move becomes the moment everything changes. I should have walked away. I should have said goodnight. Instead, I said his name. Softly. Like it wasn't just a name anymore. But a secret I'd kept too long. And he stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek. Warm. Steady. Dangerous. And when I didn't pull back, he didn't ask for permission. He didn't have to. His hand found mine first. Not rushed. Not greedy. Just a gentle, certain slide. Like he already knew how I'd fit into him. My fingers trembled. But they didn't let go. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I felt his thumb trace a slow, silent circle across my skin. That one small touch. It unraveled something in me I didn't know was still tied. He stepped in. Close enough that our shadows became one. I could smell him, warm, familiar, and slightly sweet, like coffee and cedar. Everything in me went quiet. Except my heartbeat. That was loud enough to drown out the city. I didn't kiss him. Not yet. But my body leaned in before my mind could stop it. That instinctive tilt. That surrender you don't plan, just feel. He looked down at me. Like he was memorizing something sacred. And then he whispered. "You don't have to explain. I already know." God. That line. It broke me. Because for so long I'd been explaining. Justifying. Shrinking. Making myself small enough to fit into the life I thought I wanted. But in his voice, I heard something I hadn't heard in years. Permission to want. To feel. To stop apologizing. The world narrowed, just him and me and the warmth between us. And when his hand brushed my jaw, I didn't flinch. I leaned in. His lips didn't crash into mine. They hovered. So close I could taste the hesitation. Like even now, he was still giving me a choice. My breath shook. And I whispered, I don't know how to stop this. His eyes closed, forehead resting against mine. You don't have to. We didn't kiss like strangers. We kissed like we'd been aching for this since the day we met. Slow. Messy. Quietly desperate. Every part of me leaned into it. Not just my lips, but my years of silence. My unmet needs. My buried hunger. He pulled me closer. No words. No rush. Just heat, and breath, and something I couldn't name. And when we finally pulled apart, barely, his hand still holding my waist like he couldn't let go, he whispered, come with me. And I didn't say no. I didn't ask where we were going. I just followed. The night felt suspended, as if time had loosened its grip just for us. Streetlights blurred as we walked, like we were somewhere outside of real life. A dream maybe, but one that knew exactly what it was doing. His apartment wasn't far. A third-floor walk-up, quiet, lived in. It smelled like cedar and clean laundry. The lights were low. He didn't rush. He didn't even touch me at first. He just set his keys down, took off his jacket and looked at me, like he was making sure I was still sure. I wasn't. Not completely. But something in me had already crossed that invisible line. And there was no turning back without breaking something even deeper. He poured 2 glasses of water, handed me one, and when our fingers touched again, that same slow electricity, we stood there holding glasses we weren't drinking, like 2 people trying not to fall but already midair. I can take the couch, he said gently. I almost laughed, because he meant it. Because even now, when everything was thick with wanting, he was still giving me space to choose. But I didn't want space. I wanted this. I set my glass down. So did he. And then I walked to him. Not fast, not dramatic. Just honest. My hands found his chest. Warm. Solid. Alive. And when he finally touched my face, my whole body answered. There was no rush. No performance. Just hands learning each other. Slowly, reverently, like every inch mattered. We didn't fall into bed. We moved like time had melted, breath to breath, moment to moment. He kissed me like he was afraid I'd disappear. And I kissed him like I wanted to remember what it felt like to be wanted. And when he whispered my name into the space between us, it sounded like something holy. Later, when the room had gone quiet again, when the only sound was our breathing, soft and unsteady, he pulled me closer. No questions. No promises. Just warmth. And I realized I hadn't felt safe in years. I stayed until the morning. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew sleep was never really the point. It was the in-between hours. The way his arms stayed around me even after the heat faded. The way our legs tangled like our bodies still hadn't finished speaking. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't even mostly that. It was the quiet. The closeness. The way I felt when he looked at me like nothing about me needed fixing. When the sun began to sneak through the blinds, I sat up slowly. Reality always finds a way back in. He stirred beside me, eyes still heavy with sleep. But when he saw me getting dressed, he reached for my hand, gently. You okay? He asked. I nodded, but my chest ached. 'Cause I wasn't. Not really. But I didn't regret it. Not a single moment. I don't know what this means, I whispered. He sat up too, leaned in until his forehead touched my shoulder. It doesn't have to mean anything yet. But that was the problem. It already did. It meant something when I let him see me, really see me, in ways no one had in years. It meant something when I didn't feel guilt. Only sadness for the version of myself that thought she'd never feel this again. I left quietly. No dramatic exit. Just a soft goodbye, and one last look that held more than words ever could. I drove home through empty streets, the morning light too honest for what I was carrying. When I stepped inside, my husband was making coffee. He smiled. You're up early. I froze for a second, nodded. Yeah, just couldn't sleep. He kissed my cheek, a routine gesture, warm but distant, and I stood there, coffee brewing behind me, his lips still against my skin, and I thought, How do you go back to something that no longer sees you? Days passed. We went back to work like nothing had happened. Same desks. Same meetings. Same careful glances that felt anything but casual. No one noticed. At least I don't think they did. We were good at silence. Too good. But everything felt different now. The space between us buzzed. Not with uncertainty but with memory. Like the air itself remembered every touch we hadn't spoken about since. At home I went through the motions. Cooked dinner. Answered emails. Smiled when I needed to. But something inside me had cracked open. And once you've been seen, you can't go back to being invisible. One night I found myself standing in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. Really staring. I looked older. Softer. Sadder maybe. But also clearer. I touched my own cheek. Right where he had. And I whispered, almost without meaning to, "I'm still here." That next Monday I stayed after the meeting. Waited until everyone left. He lingered too, like he knew. I didn't plan what I was going to say. But when I looked at him, all I said was, "I don't know what this is. But I can't keep pretending it's nothing." He didn't answer right away. He stepped closer. Hands in his pockets, gaze steady. "It's not nothing," he said. And those 3 words, they shattered the dam. We didn't kiss. Not there. Not again. But the silence that followed felt more intimate than anything. He reached for my hand. Just held it. Quietly. Like a promise not for forever. But for honesty. And maybe that's what I'd been missing all along. Not the thrill. Not the danger. But the feeling of being real with someone. Of not hiding. Of finally letting myself want. I don't know where this goes. I don't know what happens next. But for the first time in years, I feel awake. And that has to mean something, right?